There we go. Okay, it started to record. Oh, no. Hold on. Sorry. Okay, I think we're good now. There we go. All right, it begins in 3, 2, 1.
I have
Current Geek!
Current Geek. Aha.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Current Geek. That's right, Current Geek Autopilot Edition. A chance for us to watch the pilot episode of a TV show and geek out about it. I'm Scott Johnson. He's Tom Merritt. And this week, we're talking about Ashes of Love.
Oh, I'm so excited, Scott. I'm so excited. I feel like I'm inducting you into my cult.
I do too, because I was unaware of this until you made me aware of it. And now I have so many questions, so many thoughts. I know.
This is actually therapy for me. So the backstory of choosing Ashes of Love, which, by the way, is a Chinese drama.
Yep. It
was a hit drama in China, premiered in August of 2018. So it's very new on Jiangsu TV. This came about because my wife, right after we moved into this house, was so stressed out by work and the move that she was just wanted to find something to take her mind off things. And she started watching a Chinese drama on Netflix. It was like a teen drama.
Okay.
But this led her into a whole world of discovering this app called Viki from Rakuten in Japan, and discovering these Korean dramas and Chinese dramas, and this whole subgenre called wuxia, which is about martial arts, and a subgenre of that genre called xianxia, which is the wuxia martial arts, but in like a fantasy world. And that led to Ashes of Love. And when we were watching this, I was just watching it thinking, man, are they intentionally trying to imitate parts of World of Warcraft?
Like channeling it? Yeah, a little bit.
And thankfully this first episode, which is the only one we watched, does show you that, but it continues through all 60 some episodes of this thing. But yeah, I have needed an outside perspective on this sort of thing, because while at points these things are weird and cheesy, they kind of captivated me. And so I was very excited to get your perspective on this show.
I'm going to keep going with it, actually, so that I can get get the larger picture. But it's really funny. So the only thing Tom had said to me leading up to this, and I was all for it because it just seemed like an interesting thing for us to do. A lot of times we'll dip back into something old or something that we all knew from before, but this was a new thing, and to me, 100% completely new. And my only experience with Chinese cinema, television, any of that really up to this point are Hong Kong action movies from the 90s and early aughts. Like that was my...
Sure, like the good old-fashioned gangster fight 'em up kind of movie.
John Woo before he moved here and all that kind of stuff. Like I was really into that stuff. Action-packed stuff, usually subtitled, but sometimes dubbed. Like that was my experience with it. In fact, it's a little bit like anime for me. My first exposure to Japanese anime were the standards like Akira and Ghost in the Shell and things on TV when we were kids like Voltron and things like that. Speed Racer, like those are technically sort of in the same vein.
They're anime, yeah.
And because they're so when I say they're standard, I just mean they're wider audience. They made it across the pond quite a bit at a time when that was less possible compared to now. And so that was my only taste of it. So when somebody would hand me a real genre dinger, I'd go, whoa, what are we doing here? And like, I didn't get it at first, but then I would kind of ease myself in, understood anime more. And now I'm to the point where I really like a broad range of different kinds of anime, and I understand where they're coming from. I feel like I'm about to have that experience with Chinese television, because up to this point, like I said, it's been Hong Kong stuff, and that was it. And most of that Hong Kong stuff was while the British were still occupiers of Hong Kong. Like, I'm not really getting the mainland culture or any of that come to me in any kind of like Chinese content. So you say, okay, watch this. It's got these connections to, it feels very Warcrafty and all of that. Here's the funny thing. On the other side of this first episode, this is what I actually came away with. You're not wrong about that comparison, but it goes deeper than that, because while I may be new to Chinese television and cinema, I am an old school guy when it comes to the last 10 or 15 years of their video game output. And it turns out it's very similar. So in the way that this reminds you of WoW, this reminds me of all of the weird knockoff MMOs that come out of China. And I don't mean that as a negative necessarily, but there's tons of them, and they all smell a little like World of Warcraft, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Right. No, that makes perfect sense. Like it's this genre that permeates both the video games, movies, and TV shows. I feel like I should give people a little summary, because they're going to hear Ashes of Love and think like, oh, okay, so it's a romance thing. Well, it is, but so are most of your MMO stories, right? So it's more than just that. It starts off with the flower goddess dying, giving birth to her daughter Jinmi. She's heartbroken, and she's worried that her daughter will suffer a great trial. So she gives her daughter the loveless pill that prevents her from feeling and expressing love. The flower goddess orders her subordinates to keep the girl's birth a secret, keep her within the water barrier in the flower realm for 10,000 years, hoping that she'll avoid that trial. 4,000 years later, because time is like irrelevant here, 4,000 years later, the heavenly emperor's second son, Xu Feng, was sabotaged during the development of his phoenix spirit, and accidentally crash lands through the water barrier into the flower realm, and is saved by Jin Mi, who thinks he's a crow because he's all burnt up from the fall. And then she kind of helps him recover, and he develops feelings for her. There's also his older brother, Run Yu, who gets brought in. There's a little bit of a love triangle going on. And then you're going to be introduced to the demon realm and the war between heaven and the demon realm. And they're all going to get sucked into that pretty soon.
Yeah, which is a little shades of Diablo in there. Like, there's absolutely the impression I get is that this is the way that China also makes their video games. Now, I'm going to sound a little ignorant today, because with their MMOs, like let me break this down. When you look at World of Warcraft, there's a bunch of Western style cultural approach to fantasy in it. Okay. So it's all stories that I can relate to, that resonate with me. I get it across the board, and I totally understand it. And there's other games like this. Elder Scrolls has a same thread. You know, I'm very much into the Western notion of an RPG. And Chinese RPGs have all of the flash and all of the and sometimes more of it, but all of the like great dragons landing and fighting and explosive magic, and you know, all the flash that you would have around a thing like that. But the stories make no sense to me. And this reminded me of that a little bit. And again, not a knock on it, because I think this is a me thing. I need to get to a place, and maybe you've gotten there, and that's why I maybe need to just keep going with the show. But I need to get to a place where I don't just dismiss that stuff because I don't get it. I consider myself a cultured guy who understands a lot of different kind of media, and I understand the nuance of various things. But once in a while, something comes along, and I go, what the crap are we doing? What is this? And this show made me feel that way a lot. And again, not in a negative way, but I'm just like,
right.
Wait, he's who again? And why are they doing that? And did they explain how that magic worked? But maybe they don't need to. Like I feel like I'm just on the outside of that ring, you know, and I'm almost there.
So I think that's one of the things that makes me so fascinated with this is this first episode definitely has all the flash. So some of the later episodes are going to have a little bit less of the mystical stuff, which does make it a little easier to follow.
Right.
It is all very mythological, and from what I've come to understand, sort of loosely based on Taoism, and some of the older tales and gods, and Journey to the West, which is a very famous Chinese mythological text. There's a few other fantasy novels that they're sort of riffing on, and so we're not grounded in those, right? We're grounded in all this European based mythology. So when we watch Game of Thrones, we're like, oh yeah, okay, I know generally the lay of the land they're trying to do here. So with this, it kind of turns your head. You're like, wait a minute, the heavenly emperor, and 4,000 years just went by, but she only aged like a couple of years. And who are the demons, and why do they have horns in their head? And it takes you a few episodes to get used to that stuff because it's different. But once you get the mechanics of it, you're like, oh, okay. So these are the gods, like Greek gods, kind of Chinese mythology. And there's a heavenly realm, and there's the demon realm. There's a few other realms with some demigods, and the gods all have status, and they're all fighting for status, and they're immortal, but they can be killed. Immortal means they don't die of disease, but they can still, there's still the ability to get rid of them. So there is some stakes, and they're always, I've watched a few of these now, there's always a tour through the mortal realm where they have to take mortal form as a trial to learn the pain and agony of being human. That's like a constant theme in this stuff, which I guess, again, comes out of mythology. But once you get that lay of the land, these are some really interesting stories going on that are a totally different take on fantasy. If you're like, yeah, okay, Game of Thrones is great. Love Game of Thrones, but I've sort of, Lord of the Rings, I'm looking for something different. If you're looking like, I want to just bust all of my preconceptions and be surprised, this is one way to do it. Yeah,
I'm trying. I'm going to try really hard actually to do that. I'd like to, because what I'm looking at is fabulous. Like the visually anyway, there's quite a vision happening here, right? But because I don't have any of that context, I'm trying to see it as, it's easy to go, oh, well, this is just dressing on a hollow idea. But it's not, obviously. I just don't know enough about it. So, and
that is not I don't think that is an unfair reaction.
Right.
Because that's the weirdest thing about a lot of these Chinese dramas, because there's sort of a Galapagos Island thing going on, right? Like China is just isolated enough from us that it has developed its own sort of storytelling vocabulary that is weird and different. And also it has got just enough of our influence and enough of our movies showing over there that they occasionally try to imitate, or at least that's my interpretation, something that is normal in Hollywood drama. And you're like, I don't know, I'm not sure if that's working. But it's ups and downs. There'll be parts where you're like, wow, that was a really bad bit of dialogue right there. Like, and this is a real cheat on the plot. And then they'll go into something you're like, that's ingenious. Like that would never happen. That was unexpected. That's so fun and so cool. So, it's, your mileage may vary, but if you stick with it for a few episodes, for me, it started to pay off. Like, okay, for every one of these maybe cringe moments, I'm getting 3 or 4 things that I just blow my mind.
Yeah. Is throughout the series, are these pills like a common thing? Like, are there more pills down the road, or is it just this baby pill?
There are a couple more, but it's not a terribly common thing.
It's a very odd scene so she gives birth to this baby by basically teleporting it into the air. And I texted Tom and said, well, that's how that'd be great if you could have babies that way.
Yeah, just have it float above you.
Just have them float above you and then pick them out of the air.
I will say, the birthing scene at the beginning of this was one of the reasons I thought maybe I shouldn't pick this one, because it is one of the weirdest scenes in any of these that I've seen. You will not see anything that weird again.
Plus, the background out of it is I'm supposed to go, oh, this is the goddess of flowers? Like, it's the flower goddess and the flower realm, and like they really just lay some of that stuff right at your feet immediately, and you're supposed to sort of make sense of it. And then it's like, she's giving birth. And then they make this kid eat a red pill, the baby, and they do an internal camera shot of the thing entering the esophagus. It's like all close up and going through the esophagus down to like the stomach sphincter thing, and then boop, goes down into the gut, and then the camera zooms back out. And I just thought, well, that was a lot of effort just to make sure we all knew that this pill took the journey from
what is going to pay off there is you're going to see it kind of glowing in her chest from time to time, because it's sitting there like preventing her from falling in love.
Okay, right, because that's the whole point, is that thing's supposed to prevent her from ever making that very mortal mistake. And
that's going to be one of the major themes is, can any of her suitors cause her to break through the power of that magic?
Please tell me it's an episode where someone just slaps her on the back at a reunion or whatever, and it just goes, what? And out it comes. And now she's in love. She loves everyone. I love everyone. My pill's out.
Well, and it's romantic love. Yeah. She's very friendly to people, and she feels that sort of filial love for people, but she can't fall in love.
Right. Well,
and that's because the flower goddess fell, and I'm a little spoiler here. The flower goddess fell for the emperor. You'll find this out really quickly, and was brokenhearted for various reasons.
Now, do you have okay, so if I watch a Japanese film with subtitles and not dubbed, I find that really an easy watch, no problem. Something about the cadence of the Chinese, I think this is Mandarin. Something about the cadence of Mandarin in particular is very discordant for me while I'm reading the words, and I don't know if this is something that will go away. Probably will go away with time because I just get used to it. But
you just get used to it.
I was having a hard time. Like it's a very poppy, loud. They have different emphasis than we do.
So like the talking was distracting you from the subtitles.
It was, and I had to like really like, oh, okay, just pretend they're not talking. I just read that right there, and then and it's just a weird thing with me, and it's because again I don't see a lot of Chinese content
because you secretly understand Chinese. That's
I mean, I've been to China and you know, walked around and had interpreters and had people talk and then they would interpret it. So it's not like there's nothing, I find nothing offensive about the language. It's just
sure.
For some reason that they weren't popping and I couldn't,
I'd
have to back up.
Yeah.
I backed up sometimes because I'm like, no, wait a minute. What did she say exactly? Because the language itself, which is fascinating in its rhythm and just how it sounds, is making my brain fart, and I'm like, wait, the words, I didn't get the words. Let's go back and read the words again. So maybe that would just get easier with time, like it did when I kind of went through that with my anime phase. And I would get the hang of it. But yeah, it's fascinating. Like visually, it is unlike any show we make here. Like it's such a, like everything's, how do I put this? It's the most
it's not low production value.
No, it's not at all. It's a hard thing to put my finger on because it's not low production value, but it's also not, you know what, there's just no grit in it. Like it's just everything's very
really
clean.
Yeah, and that's not true of all the Chinese dramas.
Right.
The wuxia that takes place on Earth that's not fantasy is very gritty. We watched one called Nirvana and Fire, which I actually think is just a really great show.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a lot of the weaknesses that Ashes of Love does, but it's very gritty because it's taking place in the real world. Even though it's fictional, it's historical fiction, whereas this is totally fantasy. So everything is like stylized, like everything in the flower realm. And this is what reminded me of Warcraft. Like it feels like you're in the elf city where everything's just shiny and there's sort of this din in the background of harmony. And flower petals everywhere. And then you go to heaven and everything is just clean and marble and glorious. And then you go to the demon realm and it's still not gritty, but it's polished dark
red,
with lava and glowing green, like you're in the undead realm.
Yeah, it has a video game aesthetic like that. And like you say, it's a lot like, I mean, it really is like WoW or these other, like I will test and play a lot of Chinese and Korean MMOs because I get fascinated with what they're doing. And they're always, there's no, you know, they've been actually dubbed into English, so you don't have a lot of the language stuff, but you go into these worlds and you're like, oh, well, that's basically Thrall. Like you just made Thrall over there, but then it'll take some wacky turn. And I find that stuff kind of interesting and sort of fascinating as that stuff makes its way over here. I feel like this feels like that first experience I had there. That's what this feels like, except just a different kind of entertainment. And I'm still sort of processing what it was. Like there's still things about the story I'm unsure of. It ended in a weird way. They're also very, you know what, this I noticed they really like, and this is also very Japanese choice as well, in Japanese anime and film. The credit sequences, both before and after, the intro and the after credits, are ridiculous. Like they're
spoilery. That's the thing that Eileen and I first were like, wait a minute, like that shows that person that we think is dead with that other person we didn't get to meet yet, and so obviously they're alive. And oh look, they're having a wedding, so I guess they fall in, you know, like there's spoilers in the credits, but they're not spoilers for how things happen. And they are like way long and crazy over the top. Yeah.
Now you mentioned in here, is based on the novel Heavy Sweetness, right?
Heavy Sweetness, Ash Like Frost by Dian Xian. It is a novel in China, and they do this a lot. They take these novels that are a lot of times e-published. They're electronically published and turn them into series. It also received the highest score in Chinese drama shows criteria on Viki when it was available only on Viki. It's available on Netflix now, so you can get it here in the U.S. without downloading anything else but Netflix. But on Viki, it got the highest score in Chinese drama shows at 9.7 out of 10.
So the reason I bring that up is this the history of that novel? Is that Game of Thrones level popular over there? Like, is that what that is?
I don't have a good sense of that. These things feel like Twilight to me. They just burst into popularity. Everybody consumes them, and then they move on to the next one.
Yeah, that's okay. So that's the other thing I was having a hard time explaining. There is at least on the game side, and I'll keep referring to that because that's my point of reference. There is a kind of disposability quality to them, and it isn't to say that they're not good or the gameplay's not good or even that the stories aren't good. It's just that they feel like you're supposed to gobble it up and then be done with it. And I think European or Western fantasy tends to be a little more, the rings were created for man and the dwarves.
We're a little more precious about it.
We are more precious about it. Yes, that's the way of putting it. And I thought there have been times in my life where I think that preciousness is important, but I think maybe I need to rethink that because they're making this content. And people, I assume, are kind of ripping through it and are anxiously waiting the next bit. I think that's probably okay. That's like reality TV for us
too,
right?
So there were 60 episodes of this. There's 63 on DVD and 60 on TV, I think, or something, or may have that backwards. 63 on TV, 63 episodes on TV. And the way they don't do it like us, where they'll be like, oh, 8 episodes this season and then 12 next season. No. It's 63 episodes, all run at once.
Wow.
Right? And they generally will run like 2, sometimes 4 a week. Like 7 o'clock every night is Ashes of Love. New episode every night, 2 or 3 nights a week until all 63 are done. And then that's it. They don't have seasons that way. So that ties into that disposability you're talking about, which you're like, oh, for the next few months, I'm watching Ashes of Love. And then when it's done, it's done. I move on to the next one. There's not going to be more Ashes of Love.
It's like Pulp Fiction novels or early comic books that were just sort of shocking, like Tales of the Crypt style stuff back in the day, or maybe better than that, like dime store novels is an example of that. But like when we would make radio dramas that we'd make here in the States, they would churn that stuff out, like just churn it. And none of it was great, but it was
soap operas.
It was on. Yeah, it was soap operas. Another good one. Okay. I mean, them blowing up in this way, I can only go from my own perception. Okay. So if I'm wrong about this, or if you feel like this is nuts, you tell me, but my perception is they're just starting to blow up with this stuff. And that they may get to a place where they can be more precious about their content and less disposable about it.
And some of the later stuff, and this really isn't even a year old yet, so it's not like it's terribly old. But I've seen some other productions that have even higher production values and more coherent stories. The Eternal Love is a little older, but it's got a tighter story. Legend of Fuyao is got better production values. It's a little bit looser story. Nirvana and Fire, like I said, it's historical fiction. It's tight. It's good. It is US level good. But I think what's so interesting about all of these is, you could dismiss them and say, okay, this is weird, but it really did change my perspective on a lot of different things, on storytelling in general, on what television might be like in China. Like, this is not a propagandistic television show,
right?
It's totally fantasy. And the fact that you could have different take on fantasy, if you're tired of like everything seems kind of the same, it may be good, but it's kind of the same, like this is totally different. And while there are absolutely critiques, if you want something to be perfect, this ain't it,
right?
But if you want to have something different and give you some insight on storytelling that's different, I had a lot of fun watching this.
Where can that Nirvana and Fire one you talked about, is that available for?
Yeah, that one's on Viki.
Okay.
So you just, and that's a app where you can watch stuff for free.
I'll have to track
it's
it
on
down.
Apple TV and Roku and the web and everything.
I'll have to track it down because I'd like to. I want to watch this. I want to continue with the other one. I noticed, by the way, when I finished this episode, Netflix had no shortage of recommendations. They were like, look at these 900 other things that we brought over.
The
from
Eternal
Asia.
Love was another one I just mentioned. Is on Netflix as well.
Yeah. So clearly Netflix is bringing this over for an audience.
When
that's
I
eating
told
it up.
Eileen that I was going to have you watch Ashes of Love, she's like, no, have him watch Memories of Alhambra, which is a Korean drama, not a Chinese drama. And it's about a video game.
Oh, really?
She's like, Scott will love that. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but I want to see what he thinks of Ashes of Love for different reasons. So Memories of Alhambra is one on Netflix that's worth checking out because it's about an augmented reality video game. It takes place in Spain, even though it's a Korean drama. And I haven't watched it either, but Eileen says it's really, really good.
She likes that one too.
This one is certainly soap opera-y. And it has its moments where the plot can get a little bit shallow, but it also then veers off into super complicated stuff about like the nature of self and the meaning of love. And that, I think that's what I find fascinating is you're like, okay, I think I know where this is going. And then it doesn't. Right. And sometimes it does, sometimes it's predictable. And then it veers off somewhere and you're like, is that because of my experience being entirely Western, or is that just a different, like well told plot twist?
Yeah. Plus there's an aesthetic quality to what they've chosen anyway for covers and posters and stuff. It looks like straight romantic soap opera from the images. So if you look at the cover of that thing on where it's streaming or anywhere else, it's them swirling around looking into each other's eyes, and it just feels like, okay, well, this is just a love story, and that may not appeal to me. But what I saw in that first episode was, even though I don't completely understand what the hell is going on, and I'm not 100% on the story yet, there was a lot more going on than just, hey, these two meet, and now there's this love triangle, and there's the conflict that's created by that. Like, there's a whole lot more that they're trying to say. Whether I understand it yet or not is a different issue, but I could tell that they were going places with it, and now I'm just curious, like I kind of need to see it through a little more.
Well, the other thing to think about too, I actually just thought about this second. We're sitting here comparing it to Game of Thrones, which is one of the greatest television programs ever made. That is entirely unfair.
Right.
The comparison to this is Chicago Fire, right? It's NYPD Blue. It's and maybe NYPD Blue is too old.
I know what you mean, like Blue Bloods. Blue
what
Bloods
is on
is a good
at
one.
8:00 on the broadcast networks here? Like that's what this is. This is mainstream television. And think about that.
Yeah.
All of our mainstream television, for the most part, is doctor dramas, fire dramas, or police dramas, and theirs are fantasy romances.
I see that. This is good that you're doing this because
that's interesting. Isn't
it is really interesting because just because they're different genres, I mean, they're fulfilling the same purpose. I know there are Chinese filmmakers who make movies that are incredible, Oscar-worthy foreign films of huge impact and whatever, and some of them barely get approved by their own government before they can even make the film, and things like that. Like I know that experimentation is happening and all of that, but what we are really talking about here is just a piece of entertainment that is highly rated by the country of origin, and now as an import people are getting down with it in the same way that we might export, like you said, Chicago Fire or one of the CSIs or NCIS or 1,000 other acronym based shows. And my wife is the perfect receiver for this sort of stuff. She loves, like she watched Blue Bloods came out on Netflix, and she dove in and watched every second of it and loved it. I kind of rolled my eyes 90% of the time because it's cheesy, nighttime, 8:00, standard audience kind of stuff. And I'm like, man, where's Fargo season 4? Where's my weird, edgy outlier stuff? And she enjoys just a good old fashioned, let's go straight down the line kind of procedural sort of story. And it sounds like that's what these are for them.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
I think that is so interesting to think about. Like, I'm almost kind of jealous, right? Like, maybe this isn't the perfect fantasy story like we would expect from HBO, but this isn't on HBO. This is on Jiangsu TV.
Yeah.
And and so this is like, oh, so while we're all watching cop dramas, they're all watching like elves and fairies and demons fight.
Yeah, basically. I mean, and we reserve all of that, for honestly, we reserve most of that for video games. And I'm sure that there's some cross pollination going on there. Like, for example, we in this country have a big separation between video game as an art form and film as an art form. And in other countries, I think it's much closer together. I think that in Asia, especially, one really informs the other, and it's less separated. In Japan, an anime can be the biggest blockbuster of the year, and over here, that just doesn't happen. Animation does well here, but it's rarely the biggest thing anybody saw that year. But then I try to get out of my brain, get out of my box, and go, all right, well, what does an MCU movie look like in China? And I know they do well over there, but do they do well because they're culturally sensible to them, or do they do well because it's just weird popcorn fare from over the ocean? I don't know. Like there's always a reverse to my crappy limited perspective, and I'll bet that's how they see the MCU stuff. They probably see it in the same way. So I guess
Bagheera in our chat room is pointing out that China certainly has cop and hospital drama, and that's true.
Sure.
But I think it's still worth the comparison to be like, we don't have anything like this in our primetime mainstream television.
Right. I think that's a perfectly fine comparison to make. And if they have cop and hospital dramas, those are probably not the most exportable of the content. This stuff is, because we look at it and go, woo, fairies and dragons, that's cool. That's enough to get us in. It's a sellable product from Netflix or whoever's point of view. So I get that. I see why we would get that first. It's the same reason you got Akira first back in the day.
Right.
Because nothing else seemed like it might work over here. But now we have a much broader access, and that's what's happening with this. But I guess
we've had some sci-fi and fantasy in primetime here too, but this is like Ashes of Love, then The Eternal Love, then Legend of Fuya. Like it's like boom, boom, boom. They just keep them coming. It's an element. It is a regular element.
Do all of them are all of them very romance focused? Meaning like there's always
It feels like the majority of them are. It sort of breaks down from my outside perspective, and I'm not an expert on this, but from what I'm seeing, it feels like a lot of the fantasy ones try to have a romance tilt in their pitch.
Yeah.
Even if it isn't, entirely just a romance in the storytelling. And a lot of the more traditional wuxia are very much just like politics and maneuvering.
Right.
And I don't know why that is, but Nirvana and Fire, for instance, really doesn't have a love story. Like there's some minor love stories in the background, but it is mostly about strategy and politics and maneuvering.
Yeah. Sidian has a good point in the chat. He says, for that matter, less tongue in cheek, Doctor Who must be a pretty weird trip if you're culturally deaf to it. Cultural deafness. That's interesting. I think I have a little of that in this case.
Well, we all do.
Yeah.
And that's why I find it important personally to watch this kind of stuff, because it just watching it is going to change that deafness a little bit and take me out of my own experience and give me exposure to something that I wouldn't have otherwise. And I think that's important just to understanding humanity.
Yeah. Plus I've gone quite a while in my lifetime without ever even thinking about the idea that, I would be entertained by something that's being made in China for Chinese sensibilities and cultural reference. Why would I? Like, it just hasn't been in my wheelhouse. It hasn't been in front of me until now. But I guarantee there's somebody right now who's, there's some 13-year-old girl who's watching this show that we're talking about, and it's their favorite frickin' thing, and it will just become more and more common that we're all enjoying each other's stuff, and it will be less that, in the past it was always, well, everything America makes gets everywhere, but we don't get everything from everybody else. I think that's changing, and I think that's good. It's good for us.
Well, and side note, Netflix is trying to do this more too. That's one of their ways of making sure that they have lots of original content, is to acquire stuff like this. That's why Ashes of Love is on Netflix, is to say like, hey, we've got this thing you've probably never encountered before that maybe you'll like.
Do they do a logo at the top and say it's a Netflix original, or I don't remember if they did that.
You know what? Actually, let me look.
Because I know they do that a lot.
They might.
With a lot of the imports, say from Europe,
because they have exclusive Well, Ashes of Love is actually was available on Viki before too, so they might not be able to in this one. I don't know.
I know they have Netflix
I'm
written
looking
on
right
the.
now.
They have Netflix written on all the marquees and on the logos and stuff. And they treat it like it's an original, but I don't know if they can actually say that or not. I know they do that with like.
If they have Netflix on the chiclet for it, it's usually it's not.
Okay.
It's not.
Okay.
It's because they don't have exclusive. But Meteor Garden, which was the teen drama thing that Eileen first got into, is pitched as a Netflix original, even though it was originally just made in China. But I think Netflix may have kicked in some funding.
I wonder if I would do better at any of these if I started with dubbed and worked my way down to sub. You know what I mean? That worked. That was better for me in anime for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got to a point where I was like, no, what about subs? And then I actually prefer subs now. But well, that's not exactly. Sometimes I like a really goofy, bad dub on a foreign film, like one that is not the best VO work and was clearly, localized very quickly and all that. Video games too, I enjoy some cheese from that. But if I'm looking for just like a really good telling of the story, I wonder if this show would even work that way. It's how many seasons or how many episodes, or do we know? I guess
Of what?
Of Ashes of Love.
63.
Okay, 63 total episodes, so it's not really that much content. They should subtitle or they should.
Netflix is working on.
those.
They said in their last their lab days with journalists, they said we want to figure out more dubbing in English because we think that will help people to ease into shows more often, and it's something that isn't as common, and so we have to do some work on it.
I think they're talking about me. That's what I think.
Yeah.
Well, there it is. It's interesting stuff, and it's available, and you guys should see it. And I'm going to keep watching it because I'm curious now, and I want to keep going. I do feel like a stranger in the strange land a little bit.
Yeah, and that is one thing that Eileen was she's like, I don't know, that's so weird. It starts off so weird. I'm like, yeah, but the weird stuff is what I wanted you to see because of that RPG. I'm going to stop calling it a Warcraft influence because it really is just an MMO influence in general. But I wanted to see what if you were seeing it too. And so I'm very glad that you also saw what I'm talking about.
Totally.
And because of your exposure to the Chinese MMOs, they're like, oh yeah, no, they're definitely like riffing on that same song. Because I was like, yeah, this is definitely giving me that vibe. That said, the more you watch, the more sense it makes. Because first of all, you stop being overwhelmed. There aren't that many characters. You start figuring out the mechanics of how this world works because it is fairly simple. There's Heaven, Demon Realm, Flower Realm, a couple other realms kind of play in on the side, but they're not even that important. And once you figure out the main actors, then it becomes more of just the battle between them. And there's some big war scenes. There's some scenes with some dragons fighting and stuff that are pretty cool. So yeah, it's kind of fun.
I'm into dragons and I'm into fighting. Let's put those two together.
Yeah.
I like it. So check it out. Available on Netflix right now. You can go watch it. On IMDb, it's rated at an 8.8. So doing fine here as well.
Not even bad on IMDb.
No, not too bad at all. All right, next month for Autopilot, our episode will be for Farscape.
Yeah, well, don't worry. We're not going to... We're going to bring it back.
Yeah, we'll bring
English language
it back to stuff we all know. Farscape is exciting because it's been a long time for me, and I really liked that show when it aired. And also, people have been saying, "Yo, Tom Scott, it's up on Amazon. Get it now's the time." So now's the time. We're gonna watch it.
Now it can be told.
That's right. There's some puppets in there. Still the creepiest bad guy of any of those '90s sci-fi shows, as far as I'm concerned. That guy with the weird leather face. He was great. So we're into it. We're gonna do it. That's Farscape. That's next week, right here on Current Geek. Don't forget that you can support this show and what we do here, both these episodes, our film festival episodes, and even our regular discussion episodes. All of it made due because we spent a bunch of time on it. And all we ask from you is maybe head on over to our Patreon page and chuck us a buck or two. That's right. Patreon.com/CurrentGeek is where you can go. And we appreciate everyone who is already a patron. Consider helping us out if you haven't. And we appreciate everyone who does. Legal Geek is here this week. He's back. And we'll talk about whether space is the final frontier or, for patent law or investigation of the limits of current patent law in covering space tech. That's part of his segment coming right up after we end this thing. Before we go, though, Tom, where else should people have their eyeballs this week when it comes to you and you?
FreeTomNewsletter.com. That doesn't mean I'm in prison.
Okay.
That I need to be freed.
Yeah.
Ha ha ha.
I get it. It's good.
No, it's just a free newsletter. And if you want to know, like, hey, when you got another book coming out, Tom, or what'd you guys talk about on It's a Thing? I might want to jump in and listen to that. And I'll mention this episode of Current Geek. It's all there every week. Free newsletter comes right in your inbox, usually on Fridays or maybe Saturday morning. Just letting you know, like, here's all the stuff I did this week. If you're interested, check it out with links and all that. That's freetomnewsletter.com.
Very nice. For everything else, you're going to want to go over to frogpants.com and find everything I'm working on. Whoops, why is that playing? That's not supposed to be playing. But hang out over there and check out all the cool stuff we got going on because it's rad. Also, if you are coming to Las Vegas for the TMS meetup, some cool updates and news happening over at Viva TMS Vegas as well. I know we got a lot of current geekers coming to that, including me and Tom. It's going to do it for us. CurrentGeek.com is the website. Get everything you need there. Until next time, for me, for Tom, and for all of you, we'll see you then. Yeah.